Welcome, everybody. Happy Thursday. This is our Homeless Solutions Advisory Council for Thursday, October 16th. Good to see all those in person and online. Missing a few folks today, but they of course can catch up with our recordings and minutes that are always posted and published. Speaking of, public comment is always available to anybody online or in person. There is a limited time. You can raise your hand in Zoom or in person, those that are here, and have your opportunity for public comment. There's also a form on the Washington County website that can be used if you have public comment at other times. Happy to take that feedback as well. Is there anybody in the room? Great, we'll start in the room with some public comment. Please take it away.
Great. I will do my best to speak up in a way that it gets recorded. I'm Cameron Murphy. I'm a supportive housing liaison, which is another name for a case manager in our housing programs. And I work at Boys and Girls Aid as well. So a couple weeks ago, I had to work through an overstimulated referral to the program I manage because the person was told there's a 2-year program and a 10-year program, and I can go from the 2-year to the 10-year. Back in January, when I went from working in HCMS to rapid rehousing, I had a single mother who had been told by her previous case manager she could seamlessly go from the 2-year to the 10-year. Delivering the actual reality to that referral and to that program participant has not been easy. Undoing what they have been told previously and even recently by others working in this SHS system. What I want you to notice is how I'm saying 2-year and 10-year program, because after meeting with a liaison about that referral, that's how workers in this field are still referring to the medium and long-term SHS interventions. And some of them work for the organizations represented at Solutions Council. But shout out to the OGs who have been here before SHS and those who were here when it was a 2-year and 10-year program, but it stopped being a 10-year program as soon as it started. Lately, there hasn't been openings for people to transfer from the medium to long-term intervention, and we know that participants are moving to other agencies because of workforce reductions. So I lost my spot. And if the OGs are the ones training the newer staff, who are retraining the OGs? We still have people being misled with misinformation, and I'm at least one person trying to right this wrong. Who are the staff in our system still using these terms? Even though the annual phase 1 refreshers have been happening, they have missed an opportunity to remind old staff and train new staff not to refer to these programs as 2-year and 10-year programs, including how prioritization works, that the likelihood of going from medium-term programs to long-term programs isn't realistic. Have we not been making every effort to inform and dispel the misinformation that is still happening? And did you know that it's still happening? The system improvements shared to Solutions Council back in June may not have been fully incorporated just yet. I am asking that we ensure all staff throughout our system have all the information about system capacity, system limitations, system end dates, and the scarcity that's right in front of us. Ensure that they understand the information about all of this. And if it's scary, sit with that and work with staff about that. But please do not gatekeep any reality to anyone about what these programs are and what they are not. As someone in a direct service role, I know I can't be the solver of every crisis my participants experience. I also recognize the role next level training and accurate information sharing has in my skill development and career growth. Burnout from yet another training is because we're given high level overview and introductory trainings with information that is the same as before. Like again, let's dispel misinformation and provide that next level training for those of us who have sat through the 101s and refreshers with no new information. Let's reframe our work for our workforce and empower them to set aside the direct time in their schedules and deliver the information that makes this a better system for everyone, for those that are unsheltered, to those who are housed, and everyone involved in making that happen. If you're responsible for training and informing your staff, please check in with them about how they are referring to these programs. We all know that words matter. And if we stand a chance to extend these programs past 2030, it takes being honest and upfront with our community about the reality of our current available programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Cameron. Good job.
Time limits.
You too. Good. As always with public comment, staff will get back to anybody that made public comment. Is there anybody online that would like to make public comment? Not seeing anything, then we are going to keep moving on. And go right into our staff and committee updates, which is on our agenda. Sorry, I blew past that. So I think the next slide shows all the different, yeah, we'll start with staff updates. Perfect, thank you.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Nicole. Thank you for nodding. We're not seeing the slideshow at home. So I will fill time while staff, is that correct? Are others seeing it? You can see it. Oh, it's me then. It's just me. Something is funny about my view. Okay.
Jess, you want me just to read it to you?
That would be great, Kim.
No, there's just a few bullet points. The first one is funder updates.
I know that. Anything else?
Yep, state regional coordinator for shelter,
Yep.
federal shutdown,
Yep.
Metro admin fund ask,
Okay.
LIP public hearing.
Yep.
The last one is Hillsborough shelter open house.
Okay. The team did a great job preparing me. I was just going to rely on reading that image, and I don't know what's happening with my video right now. So apologies, everyone, and nice to see you. Sorry I couldn't be there in person today. I'm a little under the weather and wanted to keep my germs at home, but happy to be here with you. So let me run through those funder updates first. The first item is the state coordinator, the regional coordinator application to OHCS, our state funder. As you all have heard along the way, the state recently made very significant and we hope to be sustaining investments in a statewide shelter program system. Statewide shelter program that's meant to operate as a system. And part of that system plan is to create clarity on how funding is distributed to each of the regions, they're calling them. They're not calling them continuum of cares or MAC groups. They've been using other different words along the way, and that is part of the purpose of this application, is to create consistency across the state by establishing clarity on who is the regional coordinator for each of those areas. So we wanted to share with you that our Washington County team here in the department is preparing an application to the state to request to become that regional coordinator so we can continue layering our state resources in with our SHS resources to stably fund that current shelter system that we operate. So there's just a lot of data and application material that needs to get prepared. And I believe that information session was just hosted this morning by the state. So we're just letting you know, and the application I believe is due November 24th. So we're just letting you know that that's our intention. We think it aligns really well with our role as the COC coordinator for the region of Washington County, and that's how the state understands our area. Washington County is considered a region from their perspective. I'll keep going through the updates and then take time for questions if you all have any. Next, as you know, we're still in a federal shutdown and waiting for clarity on what are the next steps from our nation's legislators to clarify continued funding for the critical programs that operate not just in housing, but across many different areas of work. We are still hopeful and reassured by our federal lobbyists that we are in a stable place to carry on business as per usual, because we have funding to make it through, I believe it is mid-November. And that is longer than any preceding shutdown has ever taken to be resolved. So we want to just extend a reassuring note to you all that we're confident that we're able to continue cutting checks and continue operating those COC funded programs despite the current federal shutdown. And then last, on a very big highlight, thank you to everyone who supported our application or recommendation and request to the Metro Council for $10 million from their one-time unallocated admin resources from SHS. We were successful and got a 7-0 vote of support on Tuesday morning. Thank you, Kim. Zoe was there. I'm not remembering. Marcia was there. Elise was
Marcia,
there. Kemp.
Cole, Molly, yep.
Thank you. So thank you to everyone who sat in the audience. We had a bit of a grilling kind of lineup of questions from the Metro counselors, but I think they're still wrapping their minds around this new regional system funded with SHS and their role in it, learning lots. And, you know, they don't often have a presenter from a county. So they had lots of questions for us, but in the end, we're fully supportive of our request for both capital gaps, funding for capital gaps in our capital projects underway, and also eviction prevention, the funding gap that was created by the state budget that reduced funding for eviction prevention this year. So those are our funder updates for y'all. Nicole, I'll pivot to you if you have anything to add, and also take any questions.
Yeah, I'll cover just the last two items here, and one that we didn't put on the slide, but we want to make sure you're all tracking. And I'll start with that one first. On the 30th is our housing forum. As you know, this is our annual tradition of bringing together community leaders, elected officials, folks in this field to discuss issues most pressing to us housers. We're focusing, shocker, on the changing housing landscape this time, and hearing from experts at the federal, state, and local level on how we're navigating those changes as a system. So if you haven't seen the invite, if you have questions about the event, let me know. We want to make sure all of you know you're invited, and we'd love to have you. And then the next piece is you might have noticed your meeting has changed for November. We moved the time and we extended it a little bit. We are planning for a public hearing for the local implementation plan. We're really grateful to have you all host that public hearing and give the community a chance to share their feedback with us collectively, you as the advisory body and us as the staff. And that is, of course, occurring now on November 20th. The public hearing will start at 5 p.m. So this is a great opportunity to invite folks that engage in the system, that have a thought or two about the system to share, to come provide that feedback. Staff will then work on a community engagement report that will support our revamp of the local implementation plan. And then the last piece is in regards to the Hillsborough Shelter, which has an official name. It's now called,
No.
oh, never mind. We are not official. We're headed that way, but not there. Thanks, Kim. Our service provider, Project Homeless Connect, will be hosting a series of open houses. We'll be sure to make sure you all are invited to that, can see that beautiful site. And the third of our site purpose-built shelters open. So we're really eager to celebrate that with you. But that includes my updates, and Jess, I see your hands up.
Thanks, Nicole. You rounded that out very well. I just wanted to take a moment, while I have the prerogative to do so, to say thank you to the staff team here. We had a really big night. Christina, if you're in there, oh, Christina's not in the audience today. Oh, there you are. I see you. You were there with us on Tuesday night. We met with the Cornell Road neighbors about our future transitional housing project. And you know, as it is with every new project we bring online in any community where we're serving homeless people or formerly homeless people, it's always a challenging conversation with the neighbors around security and safety issues. So we're starting up one of those conversations. And I just want to thank the staff for their tremendous work and patience and attention to creating those partnerships with our new neighbors. And also invite you all to come along on that journey and help support us as we have this conversation and have other tough conversations like it ahead. So just another shout of gratitude for the partnerships around this table that make the work possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just gonna shake my head. Thank you, Jess. Thank you, Nicole. I know that this isn't pertinent to this meeting, but there's Rachel Duke twice up there and one face is Vernon's. So it caught me off guard. Like, wow, Rachel. Sorry, guys, that's a squirrel for Cam. Okay, we're gonna move on to our updates for all of our committees. So we have our Solution Council subcommittees, Nadia or Nicole, maybe.
Have any subcommittee updates, I think, as yet.
Great. Zoe's not here, but Nicole, you participate in TCBB?
Yes, the Tri-County Planning Body meeting that occurred this month was, to be kind of a little confusing, and we'll be going back in November to clarify exactly what was voted on. They heard an update on the landlord recruitment and retention plan, as well as the second part two in the budget for the implementation plan related to their goal around employee recruitment and retention. There was a vote for one part of the strategy, one part of that plan, but not both, but the budget supported both. So we will be breaking apart that budget and bringing it back to the Tri-County Planning Body during the November meeting.
Thank you. SHS Oversight Committee?
Did meet September 22nd. Usual discussion on the progressive restructuring of the oversight boards, whatever that means. Tax report, no big changes from their predicted levels, which are slightly lower than we might want. And then there were updates on counties for the county's fourth quarter reports, and that was that. Meet again this month.
Thank you, thank you. Any updates from Hack?
There's, yes, in the sense that the meeting is canceled this month, so.
Perfect.
So if anyone was planning on.
Thank you, and I
Anything
do
else?
see, yeah, Bell is on. Updates about McKinney-Vento.
Hello, everybody. So yeah, currently as of this month around Washington County, we're at approximately a little bit over 1,100 students identified for McKinney-Vento services. So that's facing any form of housing instability. We are seeing a lot more newcomer families being affected, more situations in which students are experiencing overcrowding situations. And then the whole cuts with SNAP are directly affecting our families. Also with the government shutdown, the current administration pretty much gutted a huge portion of the Department of Education that supports our students. Almost everybody from EHCY, that's Education for Homeless Children and Youth program, were eliminated at the federal level. And so right now ODE is working in collaboration with Schoolhouse Connection, which is a nonprofit, a national nonprofit that supports McKinney-Vento work, along with other states' education programs to ensure that our kids are still being supported. In terms of funding, fortunately, we're still safe for this school year, but just we're on the lookout for the following school years. And that's where we're at right now.
Thank you so much. Any other updates anybody has that they would like to share? Great, not hearing any, we will move into the bulk of our agenda. And I'm gonna pass it back to staff for bylaws update.
Okay. So we've been working on updating the bylaws, and I'm gonna see if my computer's.
For those at home, we're testing some new technology and having some challenges with the testing.
Okay, so, okay. So these are the sections that we decided that we needed to either provide some clarification based on feedback that we had received from council members before, or from just our own analysis that found some sections to be like a little bit wordy and not very clear on like what we wanted there. There's also some updates that conform with the OAO's aligned language, and that's maybe Nicole can go more into that.
Yeah, so this is a part of our effort to comply with the requirements coming from federal contracts. We're updating language to reflect what is required there. I want to be really crystal clear that the intent of what we are doing isn't changing, the framing of how we are saying it is changing. So that's a number of updates that we've made to be compliant with those policies. And in addition, I'll add, you know, there's a number of things listed here. Something I added as something that would be helpful is a virtual only meeting. And on a couple occasions, we found that there's just not a lot of folks that can attend in person, and we switched to virtual, and that worked better for everyone. So want to give ourselves that flexibility to kind of call it if only a couple people could be in person, and it might make sense to for the general participation if everyone is remote. Maddie, do you want me to run through any of the other changes or?
Sure, were there any, I think like the language thing was the one that you'll see repeated throughout some of these changes. Aside from the hybrid. Oh, there was a question brought up about the geographic area. And what exactly that includes. I don't know if it wants to be called.
Go ahead, Kim.
Yeah, that was one that I brought up because sorry, I sound horrible. I'm like Jess, I'm at home, not sharing my germs with you all. Because it didn't include Banks, North Plains, and then Gaston, which kind of splits between Yamhill County and Washington County. Because I know that a lot of the work is done under the Metro funds and that they're outside of Metro, but I was just curious as to why they weren't included on page 2 for the geographical area.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that's a good flag. The bylaws were drafted kind of combining a SHS only work group with the COC board. And I wonder if that was some language from the SHS work group. So we are planning on updating it to include all incorporated jurisdiction or incorporated cities and make sure we're clear of the population that we collectively service the department.
Perfect. I thought that might have been the case, but it's hard, you know, with our jurisdictional area too. I'm always thinking about all the cities that we serve and just making sure. And it made sense that all of those were outside of Metro, but I kept looking through the bylaws thinking, I don't think we're only focused on Metro funded programs. So thank you for getting that updated.
Thank you for catching it. Now you can go to the next slide. I think we also have the outline, kind of the high level outline of what's changed in the details. And oh yeah, so the other changes that are coming forward, Burden, I want to thank you for this suggestion early on in our Solutions Council days of moving from chair and vice chair to co-chairs and sharing that responsibility. We've also, to ensure that we can run the meeting, are recommending to you all that only one of those co-chairs be a service provider, and that those co-chairs would alternate who is chairing the committee. That way we have clear instructions who we're going to, and then if there is a conflict, we have a backup person to go to. I mentioned the virtual only. The other item here is one we've talked about quite a bit with the executive committee, and maybe in passing in this space, but the amount of subcommittees written into the bylaws is not something we can sustain. So we're gonna, we wanna bring more of those conversations to you all anyway. So our recommendations are to create a process for ad hoc work groups as needed. So when COC drops a NOFO, we can create a work group to address that rather than have a standing one. But we do want to ensure that our lived experience advisory committee remains as such an important And then there is a few other places along with the language changes we previously mentioned where we're creating clarity, where we were confused as staff what was intended. And a few areas where we're creating administrative ease where it required kind of posting in a lot of physical locations and we're not thinking that that's from our experience so far, that is not leading to more people coming or being aware of Solutions Council. So we'll reduce that administrative burden.
Yes, and then there's also just along with that, there's some changes to the terms and how long they are. So we went from I think 3 years to 4 years. I think that that's moving forward. So the idea was to allow again for not everyone to leave at the same time. So we're not recruiting all at the same time. We clarified the recruitment and nomination process. And as well as the compensation, which at this point, the county only compensates folks with lived experience as far as community engagement and volunteering. So that we reflected that to be more accurate, the bylaws. The one thing that I think came up also, and I know I get the emails about this all the time. The absences and what how we're defining that, how we're deciding what's excused, unexcused. But more importantly, it's not clear what the timeline is. So what we have says that it's ambiguous in terms of, is it number of absences per year, per term, something else entirely? And so that's something that we might want to discuss a bit more.
What does it currently say?
I think it's, I'm trying to get to it. I think it's a 3 and then like 4 excuse.
In a,
Well, that's
that it doesn't say.
It's at the
Yeah.
discretion of the chair,
Yes.
which will then be at the discretion
The
of the
chairs,
co-chairs.
yeah, so that might also,
Mhm.
What's an excused absence? Ask permission,
Went out of the country,
that's excused,
correct?
like it.
Chaperoning a group of 35
Right.
students on a
That's
swim
what I'm
meet.
saying, yeah.
What you were
Yeah.
doing today.
No, that's next.
Ah.
I need a month to prepare.
Right, get yourself in that shape.
Excused.
Zen.
so I don't know if anyone has anything.
What the other councils or committees do? Like, couldn't we just like piggyback off of like BHC or like something other?
I would think that it's like a per year thing, not a per term, because the terms are so long.
Yeah, I would,
Well, I mean, they are in
Or-
behavioral health
yeah.
council as well. I would
Yeah.
just say, why not make it consistent with every one of the councils across the state, across the thing, and then there's no issue.
So
But am
then,
I wrong?
no, you're not
Okay.
wrong. What happens if someone is excused from the committee because of absences? What do the bylaws say about bringing in their replacement or alternate, or how does that work?
There would be a recruitment
Okay.
process again.
Okay.
Yeah. We haven't had, I think, this kind of issue with any of our members. I think everyone's pretty invested and they kind of are communicating
Mhm.
pretty well.
Yeah.
But again, this is just to make it clear. for
Yeah.
The future, because it is a bit ambiguous right
Does,
now.
do you want us to give you feedback? Is that something we need to talk through today? Cause there's next steps that are kind of lining up, so I just didn't know what you need.
Yeah, so in this part, we're just discussing like if there, and in addition, like if there are any other comments or questions or things that came up while you were reviewing bylaws, and this goes to the folks online too, then this would be the time to bring it up. If you need more time and you want to email me later, that's also okay.
Perfect.
I'll add, I think we're also looking to see, is there anything you're concerned with in these changes that you don't agree with or that you want more discussion on? Our next steps is, our chair is alluding to is we have not yet gone through the legal review process of these changes, and that can be a fairly long process, so we will need to do that before we can bring it back to you, but we wanted to get as much feedback from you all as possible before we get to that stage.
I think there was one issue at the end of the bylaws that we said we were gonna discuss, which is the conflict of interest.
So that one, I think there was some discussion back and forth about, how to declare conflicts of interest and how to, and what needs to be clarified here. If anyone has any thoughts on that, again.
Well, it would seem to me that you don't want to go through every meeting, everybody saying every possible conflict of interest. It would seem to me that if there was a voting issue that involves somebody, then at the beginning of the meeting, we would say, we have a voting issue that involves this, and then people would say a conflict of interest.
Right. And we currently do that, like we,
Yeah.
in situations where, there's been a specific member for a specific meeting, or in general, if there's been an issue, with the person's, position or something like that, and how that reflects on them voting. So again, this is, it's just open to discussion if folks want to add anything here or think that there needs to be more clarifying language. This is also I will point out, it's a little bit separate from like the process of it. So when we talk about, like you're saying, this will be the process, that will probably be like guidelines attached to the bylaws of like how they're,
in our current bylaws, it puts all the responsibility on the member.
okay.
I think it might be good to maybe think about adding what we do currently to, that we do call out before we do a vote, that, to ask if there's any conflict of interest. Might be good to just explain that.
So a little vetting on staff's part to,
Correct.
yeah.
Which you've been doing.
But yeah, but just
Yeah.
clarify,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Have it written down.
putting it in there.
Okay, so, council, I can tell you that Drew and I went through with Nadia and Nicole almost line by line, all of the changes. And so we feel really confident with this summary of some of the highlights that have happened. I do think there is an ask here, around something that I've now lost. What did we just talk about? Not
Conflict of interest.
No, the one before it.
Oh, the
Absences, there's an ask here for feedback on absences and how we want to handle that, particularly around the timeline of how many absences in X time frame. Is it 1 year? Is it the term? What does that look like? So if you have any feedback, please get that to staff so that they can work through that or integrate it or whatever the case is. But I think we can.
Yeah, and I would just say, if you do have feedback on that and you don't want to share it here, you can email me, but within this month, because we're trying to get it to legal next month.
Great.
It's a couple weeks.
Fair enough. And then I think the next slide, Nadia, is just your next steps.
Yeah, so again, we'll finalize this review this month, and then next month, we hope to get it to legal. And then towards the end of the year, into early next year, we'll be submitting it to the board for approval. There are other improvements, I think, Nicole, do you want to talk about the appendix?
Yeah, so there's a bit of a wonky thing, as you are our solutions council, a Washington County advisory committee, but you're also the COC board. So if you recall, early on in year one of this group, we had a large table appendix that we adopted as part of our bylaws that did not need to go to the Board of County Commissioners. We are updating that appendix with the new bylaws, and we'll be bringing that back to you as well, but it doesn't need to go to the Board of County Commissioners, so we're gonna do that later on. And then we talked a bit about the conflict of interest. Drew, I appreciate that feedback in terms of calling out what we're already doing. We're also thinking, is there additional guidance or training we can provide to you as members? Because you're right, the responsibility is in the bylaws with you as members to address those conflicts, but we want to make sure we're getting guidance and support. So that's a future improvement idea that we hope to discuss as well.
Great.
It'd be nice to have some ethics laws, refreshers every now and then.
And I think we've been doing that every spring.
Yeah.
I wasn't here this time.
Oh, I do remember that, yeah.
Yeah,
In conjunction
so we
with
can
that.
continue doing that.
Perfect.
All right.
Any questions on that? Wonderful. Then we're gonna move on to our next agenda item, which is the LIP revamp. And we have special guest Jesse Adams here today to go through that for us. Welcome, Jesse.
Hi, thanks all. I'm at home also because I'm sick. I'm going to try to get through this without coughing into the microphone for y'all. But I'm here today to talk to you all again about the LIP revamp, kind of give you an update on what we've done since the last time we were here. Nicole, please jump in along the way whenever you would like. And then I have some additional questions for you all today, and then we'll also talk a little bit about the next step in the plan. So next slide, please. So just a reminder of the project timeline. We are still in that September to December section there. So doing the continued engagement, including you all. I'm going to talk a little bit in a couple of slides about what we have planned for next steps. So I won't talk about that here, but just a reminder that we're going to continue to do the engagement, gather as much, again, input and feedback as possible before staff starts drafting over the winter time. And then we'll come back to you all again with the draft to show you where we ended up. All right, next slide. Oh, yeah.
Sorry. I was thinking about this earlier because you guys are definitely in a lot of different committees or groups. Jesse, I know you're coming to the Tiger Chart group. So we're getting a lot of engagement, but then the next step is an initial drafting. So is there going to be engagement after that drafting? Because I think right now, one of my questions is like, I don't know how, I don't have a lot of feedback for you because I'm not actually sure what it's gonna look like. So is there more feedback happening after draft?
Correct. We're going to circle back around with the draft to talk through where we did end up, because there is still, I think, a little bit of uncertainty on what it is going to look like, right? We're going to use the feedback to draft and see what ends up in there, and then we'll come back around to make sure that like feedback was captured accurately and that it, you know, everyone's in alignment with this, not only what the content, but how we want to, you know, use that content to shape our approach.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. And so that'll come after February. We're aiming to have the draft done in February and then get leadership review and then make the rounds again to get more feedback. So next slide, please. So just a quick highlight of our August discussion. These were the questions that we all came to with last time. We talked through housing first and how to have that approach and still have solid programming and policy around that. High acuity households, how do we access the supports that those households needs that the homeless services system can't provide on their own. There was a really healthy discussion around access to behavioral health programs. And then we also talked about system throughput and how do we balance the programming that we provide with finite resources. We have a really, really healthy budget, but of course it is not a budget that meets all of the needs of everybody. So how do we analyze our programming to make sure we are doing the best that we can with those funds? So that was in August. Next slide, please. And then since then, we've continued to do engagement. We have gone to HISN. We met with the culturally specific organizations cohort. We had a really successful joint meeting. I think the first joint meeting we've ever had with the Lived Experience Advisory Committee and the Resident Advisory Board. That went really well. And then we've had continued other conversations with funders and leaders. Nicole's done some, Jess has done some. I've continued to go to groups, as Kim has mentioned. In a couple of slides, there will be specifics on what the next steps are throughout November when we wrap up our outreach at the end of November. We also completed the initial RELT, the Racial Equity Lens tool. That'll be done a couple of other times throughout the process as well. But we haven't completed the first one. Oh, no, you're good. Yep, thanks. So as Kim kind of mentioned already, right, like we're doing all of this feedback and then what, right? Like we're going to end up with this draft. Are people going to see it again? And I think that really speaks to what I want to talk to you all about today. We have a lot of spaces where we go have general discussions, right? We talk to each other a lot. But how do we make those spaces more intentional? How do we really show, again, we hear this feedback, what are we doing with it? How does it end up in our programs and policies? And how do we communicate that back out to partners and the community? So you see 3 specific questions here for you all today, but really that's the overarching, what I want to talk about. How do we create a feedback loop that is intentional? Really is around the 3 big things, right, that we talk about every year: policy, programming, and budget. How do we decide to use and incorporate that feedback, and how do we communicate that back out to the folks who are sharing it with us? I think we talk so much that it's really hard to show exactly where that ends up in our programming, and we want to make sure that we are being intentional about showing that we hear and appreciate that feedback and how that shows up in the programming and services. So that's all I have initially. Let's hear what you want.
A little more framing, because these are, again, we tend to bring you really big rock questions that are hard to think through. And if you're thinking, you know, where do we want to bite in first? What might be helpful is, where are you seeing this happen now that we need to amplify what we're doing? Or are there ideas to improve how we're creating spaces, or improve how we're integrating feedback and reporting that out? Because I'll name, we often hear from you all as well that our report out of what we did with the feedback could be strengthened, and we're eager to hear what would that look like if we were to focus on that improvement.
I think one of the things that I still need some clarity on, I'm in a few other spaces where we've talked about LIP a little bit, is there's been conversations about, you know, just the number of pages. So reducing the number of pages, maybe not being so data centric, number focused type stuff. I think one of the confusions for me is, how is this going to be used? How is the county going to use this? And then what is the expectation of your partners and how we use it? I say that because my sense is because I'm being really serious about the LIP, and I don't know if that's the degree that it needs. Maybe that's not the intention of it, is for Kim to know every word of the LIP. So just a little more clarity on how this is going to be used for county and then with partners.
If I can add too, like at the very least, if the LIP itself isn't going to be like quote unquote simplified, maybe having like a summary, like layman's terms version of it for like general public to look at too. I think that would be greatly appreciated.
Absolutely. That's a lot of the feedback we've gotten, is to have summaries, and have summaries that are maybe kind of more than one summary, that are maybe kind of audience specific, right? Because the public is going to read this very differently than a service provider is. So we've definitely heard that from folks. I think the way Nicole and I always talk about using the LIP is it's a guiding light for how we do this work. So it's probably not something, right, that you're going to reference like daily at all, right? But maybe if you're looking at, when we're talking about having these policy, budget, programming decisions, and I think that's part of why we want to talk about creating this intentional feedback loop. One of the things I heard pretty consistently, especially when I'm talking to direct service providers, is they were like, well, we never talk about this. This is the first time I've ever heard about an LIP. So maybe we need to talk about it more consistently. So if we can create spaces that are focused around like, okay, we're going to talk about policy here, and here's the LIP to remind us all, you know, like what our guiding philosophy is around our programs, and use it to frame up these intentional spaces. Because you're right, Kim, it's not something that you're going to, you know, like reference constantly while you're doing this work, but I would like it to be something that, again, is that guideline towards how we do this work and how we make these decisions when we do have to make tough decisions about what programming and budget looks like.
If I could add to that, because Jesse, you're spot on in the way I think about the LIP. I also think about it, I mean, forgive me for this analogy, but I think of it a little bit like to our system. Like this is what we intend to do, but how it gets done is happening through contracts, it's happening through program manuals. It's not the details of what's necessary, but it's that overarching framework of how we create a criminal services system.
I do wanna point out, for those that don't know this is not a Metro ask, this is an SHS coming forward and saying, hey, we wanna make sure we have our LIP in line, we're halfway through this funding, we wanna do this well, and so this is SHS staff putting this forward, asking for feedback from their partners to build an LIP for our county. Which just feeds into, again, that open discussion and collaboration, here in this county.
Can I say that a little bit differently, Kim? Because I really appreciate that. When you say SHS staff, I think you mean our Department of Housing Services staff here at Washington County. So that's exactly right. It's not Metro staff asking us to do this or the SHS program telling us to do this. Our plan is good enough as far as they're concerned, but we don't think it's good enough because we've come so far and we need to differently shape the vision for what we need to do in the next 5 years. And part of that is, in my opinion, thinking about our system as a whole, some of which is not funded with SHS. So how are we being strategic and telling that story of all of the pieces that address homeless services in Washington County?
Is the only opportunity for community members and like those that are engaging with the system, program participants and such to speak, is that the only option at the public hearing?
We are also releasing a survey that will be
Okay.
open for about a month. So there's the in-person option and there's also a digital option if folks don't feel comfortable or are not able to join.
Gotcha.
Not that I think, Jesse, are we launching that on the 30th with the housing forum? Should know this.
Yes.
So if we want to engage our program participants in conversation and gather feedback from them, the best way to do that would be to ask them to lead the survey.
Yes, and we will have, the survey has kind of 3 tracks to it, and someone could click all 3 tracks. They might identify as all 3, but there's kind of a general public track, just the person that's interested in this work. There's a track for people that do this work that are in homeless services systems, so we have specific questions for them. And then there's another track of questions for folks with lived experience for us to understand those differences. So I don't want to make a commitment because we're still working through our policy, but our intention is to provide a kind of a raffle survey for the lived people that complete the lived experience survey.
Is the intention for that lived experience population, is it gonna be framed in a way that is for folks who are currently living that experience or who have lived that experience?
It's both.
Okay. Thank you.
We'll be sharing out kind of a 1-page flyer for you all to be able to share electronically or post up with a QR code that'll bring folks right to the online survey. That should be coming out around the time of the housing forum.
You see it as kind of a mission statement, right? And it allows you then to look at what you said and then ask the question is, are we doing what we said we're doing? So, you know, again, from the Metro point of view, when you have to look at all of these things, as Kim said, sometimes you're overwhelmed with the words and the data and you can't see what you're really talking about. So I really like that idea of making it clear at the beginning is this is what we want to do. And then all this stuff says how we do it and are we doing it?
Mhm.
What all spaces do we have currently that you all find are like really useful spaces to provide that feedback?
I'm gonna kind of answer your question, Jesse, but I was just thinking about this, cause you said one of the tracks is like the direct service staff that are doing this work. I think we wanna make sure that they understand, again, the role of the LIP as that blueprint. Cause I think they're actually gonna have a lot of feedback about program manual.
Yeah.
That's where they could really lean in. And so just that deciphering that for them so that they actually give you what you're looking for. No, I mean, what, you know, like I saw on the agenda for chart, Jesse, that you were gonna be there, and I was like, oh, that's fantastic. That's actually a really good group to bring this to. So I think, I mean, just based on that one kind of offshoot of this work, like chart in Tigard, clearly you're getting into a lot of spaces. I'm gonna say it again. I think I said it last time, and I certainly said it in other spaces. The Hisson meeting about this, where we had breakout sessions and built that thingamajigger. I don't know the name of it. The what?
Easy Retro.
Easy Retro. There you go. It has a name. That was a fantastic space. And I actually think you hopefully got a lot of good information from it.
100%. And it's really nice. I like that method too, because you have a record, right, that everyone can see. It's not meeting notes that you might not go back and look at, but I like the visual kind of post-it notes.
Right.
And I'd be remiss not to bring it up because you mentioned that tool, but just so the council is aware, we've also done that Easy Retro one in other engagement opportunities. So I'm hearing that that is kind of a good tool to lean to, those virtual engagement tools that allow people to directly provide that feedback. Just to give you some examples, when we were designing the transitional housing NOFO or notice of funding offering, we did that with recovery housing providers, and we did it most recently with some service providers related to language access.
Would there be, could we think about creating that, like an ad hoc space for direct service workers to participate in that sort of a conversation? I mean, the survey is one thing, but I know there are a lot of people who would rather just participate in conversation. And if there's that tool that is getting good feedback, it might be.
Drew, can you say more about what you mean? Like, what would that look like?
Convening folks doing this work in a large space to work through the same conversation you did during Hisson, with the understanding that not many direct service workers probably attend Hisson on a regular basis.
So that pathway of direct service, utilizing this tool there, because I think you'll get a lot of feedback. Which is great.
And surveys often get lost in emails, and direct service workers are very busy and don't often have time to sit and complete a survey. But absolutely have a lot of relevant information to share.
Hi, Adam. You'll see in the chat that Jess just welcomed you. We are talking about the local implementation, whatever, the LIP.
LIP.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks. If you have any feedback or any questions, we're here for it. Because wow, do we have time? Okay. Yes, thank you, Adam.
Wow.
So good.
So I'm hearing you all talking about like convening kind of specific spaces, using things like the Easy Retro to facilitate the discussion is helpful. Is that something that, I mean, because we're talking kind of specifically about the LIP right now, but really I would love to hear from you all just about feedback loops in general, right? Because we need to come and talk to you all about when, you know, we make new program manuals, when the budget and the work plan are getting created, right? Like there are lots of different things that we need feedback on. So just kind of in general, feedback loops, like what is that kind of universal advice, what I'm hearing from you all now? Or do you have something more specific to talk about when we're going through the budget process every year? Like what kind of spaces are helpful for just in general feedback? What feels productive?
Yes.
Yes, and yes, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I would actually, it's great that we're gonna engage our direct service about the LIP, but a ad hoc committee around program manuals for those direct service staff, I think that would be a fantastic space. We've talked about this again in a different space, getting together our managers of those programs. Because they have phenomenal feedback. They're experts in some ways along with our direct service staff. So, and to Drew's point, just giving them that ability to come together and have those conversations, I think there's a lot of value add there. I know I happen to have 2 staff that are on the lived experience subcommittee and they love that space. They're so thankful to bring their voices and have that opportunity to engage in that way. And so, Jesse, the answer is yes. Any opportunity, particularly our staff, fantastic.
And not just supervisors. I mean, there are,
Totally,
Mhm.
100%. Yep. Experts.
So Rachel, I'm seeing your comment in the chat, and that is, yeah, the third question on the slide, right? How do we communicate back out to partners and communities? So with the LIP, it has been a part of our intentional plan, right, to go back with that draft and say, like, here we heard you, right? Like, here's where it ended up in our draft. So how I wanna think through ways to make that like again an intentional process, but also maybe a more like repeatable process, right? The LIP is this big lift. Nicole and my team and I are devoting like a lot of time to this. I want to make sure that we have things in place that make that easy and routine and repeatable, right? Sustainable practices to be able to go back and do all of that. Because as Kim has mentioned, right, like we are in a lot of spaces and it is going to be, again, a big lift of time to go back to all of those spaces and say that. So I'm wondering if you all can help me think through ways to make that, again, yes, intentional, but also repeatable and sustainable.
Again, I'm gonna not answer your question directly, but one of the things that I learned through this bylaws process was having, in this case, like kind of the side notes of what was changed with maybe a little bit of a reasoning behind it. I know that's extra staff work, but that alleviates questions later. Like, oh, they're already explaining to us, so they don't have to tell us why the changes were made. It's already just in here. That could be something, because we're not gonna take the old LIP and the new LIP and go back and
Right.
scan both and compare. So if it's just told up front, these are some of the, like we did today, these are some of the big changes we made with the reasoning behind it. That's always really helpful.
So I'm gonna get a little bit more specific. So, I mean, obviously, even when, with the LIP, when I go back and, do all of these spaces again, people will miss it, right? They might not be able to make the meeting or whatever. Folks who heard the initial presentation might not see the second. So even if we send out like an annotated one in email, that's going to get lost, right? As has already been mentioned, emails boxes are huge and time is short. So what would you all suggest besides like coming to meetings and talking through it? What is the best way to show folks to like really, again, kind of communicate these changes out there? We heard your feedback. Here's where it ended up. Not just in meeting spaces, but again, where folks can find it on their own time maybe, or folks that didn't make it. Like, what are some other options to really communicate effectively?
I mean, I think to Abel's point about, like a shorter version that really highlights the key stuff, the Cliff Notes version of the blueprint. And then just the recognition, you can do it in email, in text, out loud, on Braille, on a banner with an airplane, and still not everyone's gonna get it. And so just going, okay, we did our best. I think utilizing the website and having it available, the abbreviated version in some space available to folks. But Jesse, don't put the expectation on yourself that you're gonna get it to everybody in exactly the way that they are gonna ingest it the best, so.
I mean, I agree. I do think an abbreviated version being sent out also with on a website, et cetera. But then I don't know if there's a way to collect the data or information from those who have participated in the process and then create something that is just specifically for them. That's a bullet point where then they can click through if they want more information. Right? So, I mean, it really is up to the person who participates in the process to engage further once they've given you the information. So that it's really on them to do it, but I also think making it easy for them to get that information. So bullet point with a click through to get further. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
It's almost like an abbreviated newsletter.
Yeah.
I throw it through Constant Contact, put it on a button, click here, you know, you want more information on this specific housing project, great, boom. You know, you want to hear the feedback, you want to hear all the dirty feedback as to everybody in the county from this plan, click this button, I'll give you the PDF. Right? I mean, it's really just, it's also pushing the people to engage a little bit more than they've probably done before. So the responsibility is on the person who engages, not you, as long as you're providing in multiple ways.
All right. So to sum up, audience specific, really accessible, quick to get to what matters to them. I heard that a lot from direct service staff too, right? Like a lot of this isn't talking to them. So make sure that like the parts that are relevant to them and their work are really obvious and clear. And then the other thing that I wanted to bring that I've been hearing a lot is again, like the people saying we don't talk about it a lot. So I want to be really intentional about that moving forward, right? When we do talk about budgets, when we do, you know, program and system analysis, like talking about the LIP and how that informs the decisions, I think is something I really would like to focus on at the county. But before I kind of wrap up with the next slides, is there anything else anyone wants to add?
Bell put in multiple languages.
Yes. Yep.
I'm gonna throw out one more thought that I don't know if it's, I wrote, is there a way for, like, let's just say I'm giving feedback and I'm from NAMI of Washington County, right? So I'm providing feedback. Is there a way for me to know other organizations who have also provided feedback? So if I'm looking at an LIP and I'm able to say, hey, I'm looking at it as NAMI, but I'm able to say, hey, there is no input from PHC, from Project Homeless Connect. I might throw her a text and say, hey, Kim, why don't you think about giving some feedback here? Because I know you're a part of the bigger part of the picture. So I don't know if there's like a social pressure, bad word, but like, I was just thinking like a social way to connect, because I think what you're trying to do is engage people in this work. And if I know that a very valuable asset to the community as PHC has not given feedback, then I want to be able to say, you know, hey, Kim, what the heck? I don't know if that helps. I don't know if that's even possible. Sorry.
I think it's certainly possible, like, when we go out for round 2, we can list everyone that participated. I'm
Yeah.
struggling to think how to do it kind of real time.
No idea.
So the tool, so sorry, I don't remember. Does it show who put the feedback in?
We did not make that mandatory because we wanted people to be.
Feel free, yeah. Okay.
So yeah, we'll have like an engagement report, right? That shows like all the spaces we were in and all the folks that were represented in those spaces. But yeah, I'm struggling with real time too, but we would definitely be able to make that available when we come back from round 2, right? Like these are all the folks we talked to in round 1. So if anyone's missing, we can show that to folks for sure in round 2.
And I know you dream that PHC won't give feedback on everything, but that's just not a possibility. So just go with it. Just work with it. Jesse, did you say you have more slides?
Just a couple more. So we talked a little bit about the more engagement that's coming. We mentioned the public hearing that you all are going to do. Yay, thank you. I'm looking forward to that. The survey that's coming out. Like I said, you should have the 1-pager coming that you all can, you know, push out to as many folks as you would like. It'll be at the Housing Forum itself. And then we are also presenting at the SHS Oversight Committee this month. We also have 2 outreaches planned, one for the city of Beaverton and one for the city of Tigard. I'm working on getting a space together for the city of Hillsborough as well. We are looking to wrap up all engagement and outreach by the end of November so we can really focus on the drafting through winter. And as I just mentioned, we're going to synthesize the feedback and create alignment on content. We'll have like a engagement report essentially that shows how we did that. And then, yeah, 2026, early 26 with a draft for y'all.
Jesse, the surveys that are gonna go out, is that a space where clients could give feedback? Yes, okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a very, very good picture.
I wonder if
That was our, yeah.
Whoever took it is excellent.
Great eye. Yeah, great eye.
And do you like that there's the little PHC on the left-hand side, just to
I
get
know.
us in there.
This photo has made the rounds already. It has sent lots of content.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
So council, if everyone so agrees, I would love Nadia to go back to our feedback point, the point about time with absences in the bylaws. And take care of that, so then we leave without needing that feedback to you and it's taken care of.
Yes.
Is there any chance you could either pull up or read out loud what it currently says in our bylaws about absences here at Solutions Council?
Yes, okay, so, what we have written here is a Solutions Council member who is unable to attend a meeting shall notify the chairperson or staff to have an excused absence. At the discretion of the chairs, 3 consecutive unexcused absences or 4 total absences, which is consistent with what HAC is doing. However, they are doing it within a year. So we can add within a year if that.
Calendar year.
Yeah. And that may result in dismissal from the Solutions Council. Replacement members will be appointed by the County Board of Commissions following the county's adopted procedures for advertising, recruitment, review, and appointment of residents to boards and commissions. So that's, again, like if we wanna, there are other changes that they're doing. They have HAC is a bit older and they have a lot more language that they, I don't know that would necessarily be helpful here. I think the other thing that's being proposed for HAC is whether or not it should be the chair or staff or both. That makes those decisions.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and also who they notify, cause like. I do get notified by some, and then you guys get notified by others, so just for consistency and streamlining it, probably should just be staff. And then back to your point about consistency, maybe it is, we just do what HAC is doing with the 1 year. Number of absences within 1 year.
Yeah.
Does anybody have feedback on that? Yes, Adam.
Just a question, like, is there anything that would, like, when we notify staff that there's a conflict or we're not gonna be able to make it, like, is that just assumed that that's an excused absence? Or is there, like, would there be something that would be an unexcused absence or something like that?
So I can also suggest that there's some language from HAC that maybe kind of gets to the idea of like, all members we're expecting attendance in good faith. So it says like members will endeavor to attend each committee meeting in person when possible and like those kinds of things. And arrive at the scheduled meeting on time. So I think like again, it's at the discretion of either chair or staff. But again, just assuming that people have the best of intentions and like, we can write that in that we're, that's an expectation of Solutions Council members.
Adam, it was said earlier that we actually haven't had this problem. We don't have people having consistent absences, and that Solutions Council is showing up in a great way. I think staff just wanted to get the bylaws, as clear and cohesive and all of that.
Yeah, I 100% support clear and consistent bylaws and consistent with other boards. I guess what my last month, I on a personal note, I was on a vacation, and so I emailed staff and said, sorry, not gonna make it. And also I'm gonna be at a conference next month. And so I guess I just want to make sure like like notification is the same as an excused absence, I guess is what we're saying. And I'm totally on board with that.
Yeah, no, we're having discussions about you staying on or not right now. No, 100%, yes, I think really what we're saying is communication is key. Everyone is there's gonna be a need to miss, and we understand that. And yes, I think to your point, it is, that notification is the excused absent. I think if someone just didn't show up for months on end and no communication, that's when we would probably go, oh, there's something going on here. So.
Yeah.
So I think we're hearing yes to the 1 year, with the 3 absent, whatever the terms, language was, Nadia, thank you.
And 3 consecutive unexcused absences
Yes.
or 4 total absences.
Right.
A year.
Right.
Alright. The other thing, that came up was about the geographic area and what exactly was being included in that. So my suggestion would be to also just add in some phrasing like including but not limited to. So if it's not an exhaustive list, where I guess I am now, but I have not like grown up here, so I don't know all these that people mentioned. Yeah, so would that be sufficient?
Kim,
Okay.
I think we're gonna lean on you for this one. Would that be sufficient?
To say what? To say not at, I mean, I'm not Kim, sorry, but
You know what, you're allowed to talk too.
I was giving her space and I was gonna remind what, like, we're saying the specifics, like, sorry, I'll stop talking.
We've listed a number of municipalities and non-incorporated areas in Washington County. We can say including but not limited to these places.
Yeah, and I think it's just a matter of keeping in mind that if they see it and they don't see their city on there, they might feel left out. I was just trying to be inclusive because it's, like I said earlier, we have a big jurisdiction. We serve 11 cities and I constantly have to run through all of them to make sure that I've got all of them because I'd never want to forget one because they're all just as important as the next one. So that was the only reason why I thought it'd probably be good to list off those areas. Because yeah, you also have the Cedar Mill area, you have Aloha, all the unincorporated areas too that would love to probably get listed off as well. But I just think if they're actually incorporated cities within the county, we might want to actually list them just to make sure that they don't feel left out, especially since that's all pretty much Western Washington County too. So you don't want them to think that that part of the county just fell off.
Right? Okay,
So
Nadia, does that give you what you need?
Yes, sort of, but also, do we need to have places listed? Is there, I don't know what the intention was behind that, so.
Now, alternatively, could you say all areas of
Washington County, because then you don't have to, then you don't have to.
Yeah,
Right.
nice and clean.
Right.
It's everybody.
Okay.
that works.
Great. So we do have a motion and a second to keep Adam. Just kidding.
There wasn't a second.
What'd you say? Yeah, Rachel. No.
Oh, yeah.
And it passed, exactly, done, Adam is back in. It was close there, it was close there. Okay,
Sure, can I give a shout out for a member of our solution council that did not give the shout out? Want to recognize Rachel Duke and SEPA's gala tonight. So just wishing you all the best of luck. And hope you get all the resources to build all the housing and all the great things you do.
Thank you. And I just had a friend call and say she's sick, homesick. So if anyone wants a ticket, let me know.
Wish I could.
Yeah, right.
everything.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jesse, thank you for being here, staff as always, thank you for all your hard work on all of these pieces to this important work we're doing. Thank you everybody for being here, we get a little bit of a gift of time, so this meeting is adjourned.
Well done.